If I'm honest, I'm kind of tired of the alt-right talking about Israel like they really love Israel or the Jews, or as if Israel is some sort of evidence for their ideal of an ethnostate. The truth is, Israel is evidence against the alt-right narrative, not for the alt-right narrative. The common line of thinking goes that because Israel is the Jewish state, that it's a pure ethnostate of just Jews. Now, the first issue here is that this is simply not true. A large portion of Israelis are in fact Arabs or other minorities, and this includes a Supreme Court justice, emissaries, MKs, and ambassadors. There are elite soldiers in the IDF who are Bedouin or Druze. These guys are combat soldiers, not paper pushers. A friend of mine in Israel is Druze. She's trilingual. She calls Israel her home. She has no desire to live under the Palestinian Authority, and for good reason. They're corrupt and they're violent against their citizens. The Druze, Arab, and Bedouin minorities in Israel have rights as citizens, and they have the ability to serve in critical military and civil leadership roles. By this standard, Israel is not a pure ethnostate. But the issues don't stop there. It's very easy to take for granted the phrase Israel is the Jewish state, but it belies a very, very complicated question. What is a Jew? There are 3 or 4 sects of Judaism, and there's smaller sects besides these, and they all have an answer to that question, as does everyone in Israel. The saying my Israeli friends tell me is that if you have 2 Jews, you'll have 3 opinions, and this certainly goes for the question of Jewish lineage, heritage, and status. The truth is, there's a lot of opinions out there, so let's use one that actually has binding policy behind it. The Israeli state law of return. Let's use the legal definition. Now, this law states that almost any Jew has the right to emigrate to Israel and become officially recognized as a Jewish Israeli. But their children also have this right, even if their children are half Jewish. It goes further. Their grandchildren also have this opportunity as 1/4 Jewish by blood, yet they have equal rights. This includes the spouses of both children and grandchildren. Now, let's say these grandchildren have kids in Israel. These kids, who are 1/8 Jewish, are considered Jewish by the state of Israel, despite the majority of their DNA being otherwise. And yet it goes even further. According to Temple Beth Shalom in Nevada, will a conservative conversion be recognized in the state of Israel? In short, yes, absolutely. The way Israeli law works today, conversions performed outside of Israel by conservative rabbis, members of the rabbinical assembly, are 100% recognized by the state of Israel. If you ever find yourself wanting to make aliyah after the conversion process, the state of Israel will recognize you as a Jew. This means that Gentiles can make aliyah after conversion and verification. Aliyah is the process of emigrating to Israel, and each year thousands or even tens of thousands of people do this. Now, I've spent more than a decent amount of time in Israel, particularly in Jerusalem and even in the settlement regions of Binyamin, or what CNN calls the West Bank. What is very, very obvious while spending time in Israel is the many shades of Jewish Israeli you will see walking around Jerusalem and the rest of the country. This guy, Jewish Israeli via Brooklyn. This guy, also Jewish Israeli via Ethiopia. This guy, yep, Jewish Israeli. These guys, oh yeah. There's Brazilian Jews, Kurdish Jews, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahim, and so on. And the reality is that as long as the aforementioned matrilineal bloodlines are met, they're considered eligible to become Jewish Israelis. Side note, I wonder if Terry McCarthy... What this means in essence is that someone who is simply fractionally Jewish can be part of the Jewish ethnostate. In fact, a lot of somebodies are running around Israel functioning as Jewish Israelis, and they have minority Jewish DNA. Even a goy, a Gentile like me, can convert and make aliyah. I could become a Jewish Israeli. This poses a problem for the alt-right. You see, this amazingly functional ethnostate that the alties just love is now not really a pure ethnostate, is it? Especially with all those immigrants fresh off the boat from Brazil, Russia, France, and Ethiopia. The culture they've known all their lives is not Israeli culture. Their DNA might be minority Jewish, but they can become recognized by the state of Israel as Jewish Israelis. Now, there's 2 options I see from this reality. Either Jewish DNA has some mystical power to bind this people together, to forge a culture and a people, and this Jewish DNA, even as a minority of someone's DNA, overpowers their Ethiopian, Russian, or American DNA and causes fusion with the Jewish people. Break out the tinfoil. Or, more realistically, culture is a choice. Israel is a tough country. Many, most, perhaps even all of the citizens are suffering from some form of PTSD from terror attacks and rocket salvos from both the north and the south. No place in Israel is safe. No place in Israel is out of earshot of a warning siren. Everyone is in the military or government as a form of mandatory service. The economy is tight. Houses are impossibly expensive. Traffic is kusemekiti every day. If you live in the city, you're living broke. If you live on a settlement, you get terror attacks or your house bulldozed. The tension is thick. The threat of war is constant. No one owns their own home hardly, and everyone rides the bus. Everyone is stressed. Everyone has a hard life. Yet every year, thousands of people come from all over the world, leaving their former lives behind to make Israel their home. Why? To embrace at any cost their Jewish identity that may be only a small part of their actual DNA, because the minority of their DNA warranted persecution or harassment in so many parts of the world, and now it warrants them a safe haven in Haaretz Israel. Culture and identity are a choice at some level. DNA is not. Where these two meet is a very special and very beautiful place along the edge of the Mediterranean. Israel as an ethnostate today hinges on this very concept of chosen identity. The alt-right says that to a large degree you ultimately cannot choose your culture or identity. The modern state of Israel says we already have. How do these minority Jews of many cultures come together in a piece of land the size of New Jersey to make Aliyah, to make a home, to make a life as Jewish Israelis? It's quite simple, actually. They chose to.